In this video, you're going to learn exactly what to do after you save your first $10,000, the order that actually works, and the one mistake that quietly undoes everything for most people right after they hit this milestone. You did it. After months of saying no when everyone around you was saying yes, of quietly moving money aside every single paycheck, of watching a number climb so slowly you sometimes wondered if it was moving at all. You hit $10,000, and that's a real milestone worth genuinely celebrating. But here's what most people don't realize. Hitting that first $10,000 isn't the finish line, it's the starting line. And what you do in the next 12 months matters more than everything you did to get here, because this is the exact moment that decides whether that $10,000 grows into 50, 100, 200,000, or whether you're sitting in the same spot 5 years from now wondering why nothing changed. Stay with me until the end, because I'm going to walk you through exactly what to do in the right order, and the mistake almost everyone makes the moment they think the hard part is over. Here's the thing. The hard part actually is over. Building your first $10,000 from nothing, that's the hardest stretch of the entire journey. You're doing it entirely on your own effort. Your habits are still forming, and the thing that's supposed to help you the most, compounding, has barely even started. But the mistake people make is this. The moment your balance starts to look healthy, something happens. A little voice shows up, a very reasonable, very persuasive voice, and it says, "You've earned this. You've driven that old car long enough. You deserve something nicer. Treat yourself. You can afford it now." That voice is lifestyle inflation, and it's the single fastest way to stall everything you just built. Here's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like a reward. Every time income rises even a little, spending tends to creep up right alongside it. Nicer takeout, nicer clothes, a slightly better apartment. And the part most people never notice is that while they're technically still saving, they're saving a smaller percentage of what they earn than before, because income went up and the savings rate quietly went down at the same time. There's a name for what drives this. Researchers call it the illusion of affluence, spending in a way that makes you look wealthy, that makes you feel wealthy, which is almost always the exact thing that stops you from actually becoming wealthy. A lot of it is status spending we don't even question. Buy a logo-covered designer item purely for the name, and you're essentially advertising that brand for free, except they didn't pay you for it. You paid them for the privilege of being their walking billboard. So the rule at this stage isn't never enjoy your money. It's this: before any real upgrade, ask yourself one question: is this buying me the life I actually want, or just the life that looks good to other people? Before we get into the exact order of what to do with this money, it helps to see what this milestone actually looks like for two different people, because $10,000 can lead to very different outcomes depending on what happens next. Picture someone named Marcus. Marcus hits $10,000 in savings, and almost immediately he starts making small, reasonable upgrades. A nicer phone since his old one was getting slow, a slightly bigger apartment since he can technically afford the higher rent now, a few nice dinners out because he'd earned it after years of saying no. None of these felt reckless individually. But 18 months later, Marcus checks his balance, and it's barely moved. Not because anything went wrong, simply because his lifestyle quietly absorbed the exact amount he used to save every month. Now picture someone named Priya hitting the same $10,000 milestone around the same time. Priya makes one intentional upgrade she genuinely values. She starts taking a cooking class she'd wanted to try for years. Everything else she leaves largely unchanged. Instead, she pays off a lingering credit card balance, builds a small emergency cushion, and starts contributing to a retirement account with an employer match she'd never fully used before. 18 months later, Priya's balance hasn't just held steady, it's grown meaningfully, even without a change in her income. The difference between Marcus and Priya wasn't willpower in some abstract sense. It was simply that Priya had a plan for the money before the money arrived, and Marcus didn't. Let's put real numbers behind this, because seeing the actual gap is far more convincing than any general warning about lifestyle inflation. Imagine two more people, let's call them Person A and Person B, both hit $10,000 in savings at the exact same time. Person A leaves that money sitting in a regular checking account, earning close to nothing in interest, while gradually spending it down over the following years on small lifestyle upgrades. Never dramatically, just steadily the way Marcus did. Person B follows the order we just talked about, pays off any high-interest debt first, builds a small emergency cushion, and then invests the remaining core amount into a diversified index fund, averaging a historical return of around 10% annually, adding modest additional contributions along the way. 20 years later, Person A's $10,000 has essentially been absorbed into everyday life, spent gradually, with little or nothing left to show for it. Person B's initial $10,000, left untouched and allowed to compound for 2 decades alone, grows to somewhere in the range of $60,000 to $70,000, and that's before accounting for any additional contributions along the way. Add even modest ongoing contributions, and the number climbs dramatically higher. Same starting point, same 20 years, a difference of tens of thousands of dollars, built entirely from one decision, made once at the very beginning. Now let's talk about what to actually do with that $10,000, because this is where most people get the order backwards. They skip straight to the exciting part. Investing, picking stocks, watching charts grow, and they skip the boring part that has to come first. So here's the order, because the order matters more than any single step on its own. First, eliminate any high-interest debt, credit cards, personal loans, anything charging double-digit interest. I know paying off debt is the least exciting sentence in all of personal finance, but there's no point chasing an average 10% return in the market while sitting on credit card debt charging 20% or more. The math is working against you before you even start. You'd be losing money faster than you're growing it. Second, build your emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses sitting somewhere safe and easy to reach. Some people call this an emergency fund, but that word makes it sound like you're bracing for disaster. Think of it instead as a quick solution fund, money whose entire job is to turn an absolute crisis into a mere inconvenience. Car breaks down, you lose your job, the furnace dies in the coldest week of winter. You solve it with cash you already set aside instead of panic. Only after those 2 steps do you move to the third thing, investing. This is where most of the growth from here forward is going to come from. But before going further, one honest disclaimer: investing doesn't replace the effort you put in today. Most of your energy should still go toward getting better at what you do and increasing what you're able to earn right now. Investing is the thing that works quietly in the background while you focus on your actual life, not the main event itself. When people cross that first meaningful savings milestone, a common mistake is suddenly deciding they need to become a serious investor. Using complicated language, chasing complicated strategies, assuming that unless it sounds sophisticated, they're doing something wrong. Please don't fall into that trap. Unless investing is genuinely your profession, overcomplicating it is one of the fastest ways to lose money that took years to save. What actually matters is figuring out your own number, the amount you'd need invested to stop worrying about money entirely, and building your strategy around that, not around sounding impressive. Let's make this concrete, because invest wisely means very little without real examples of what that actually looks like at this stage. For most people at the $10,000 milestone, the simplest, lowest-effort starting point is a broad market index fund, a single investment that owns small pieces of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of companies at once. You're not picking winners and losers, you're simply betting on the overall growth of the economy over time, which historically has been remarkably reliable across decades, even though any single year can be unpredictable. Compare that to trying to pick individual stocks, which requires research, ongoing attention, and a level of luck that even professional fund managers struggle to consistently beat. For the vast majority of people, especially at this early stage, A diversified index fund isn't the boring beginner choice. It's simply the mathematically sound one. Some people also ask about real estate at this stage, assuming $10,000 is enough to get started. In most cases, it's closer to a down payment on future real estate goals than an investment you can act on immediately. Real estate typically requires significantly more capital plus ongoing management. That doesn't mean real estate is off the table forever. It simply means it's usually a later step once the foundation from these earlier steps is solid. When it comes to actually investing that money, think about it through the lens of keeping more of what you earn rather than unnecessarily handing it to taxes. First, use any tax-advantaged accounts available to you. In the United States, that typically means retirement accounts like a 401k or an IRA. The investments inside these accounts can be exactly the same as what you'd buy in a regular taxable account, but the tax treatment is completely different. Imagine two people investing the exact same amount into the exact same fund, earning the exact same return over 20 years. The only difference is one of them used a tax-advantaged account and the other didn't. At the end, the first person ends up meaningfully wealthier, not because they were a better investor, but simply because they kept more of what their money earned. Same investment, better wrapper. One of the easiest wins in all of personal finance. Second, don't ignore employer retirement matching if it's offered to you. I know retirement accounts feel unexciting since the money is locked away for years, but if your employer matches your contribution, even partially, that's not just a nice workplace perk. That's an immediate guaranteed return on your money before it's even been invested in anything. Turning that down is one of the easiest forms of free money most people ever walk away from. Third, as your savings grow beyond that first $10,000, start asking whether the structure of your finances still makes sense. If you're self-employed, the way you pay yourself might not be the most tax-efficient anymore. If your investment portfolio is growing outside tax-advantaged accounts, it's worth understanding, even at a basic level, how capital gains and dividend taxes actually work. You don't need to become a tax expert. Even a single conversation with a qualified professional can reveal savings you never knew existed. Fourth, think in decades, not in months. When money is tight, you naturally think in weeks. How do I cover rent this month? How do I stretch groceries until Friday? That's survival, and it's completely necessary when you're in that position. But once you've built that first meaningful cushion, thinking only in weeks means ignoring the most powerful thing you now own: time. Going from nothing to your first $10,000 is slow. It's the hardest stretch of the entire journey. But going from $10,000 to $20,000 tends to happen faster than that first stretch did. Not because you're suddenly earning more, but because your money is now working alongside you. This stretch is often called the boring middle, a long, unglamorous phase where nothing feels like it's happening. The numbers move slowly, and it's tempting to think you should be doing something to speed it up. You shouldn't. Your only real job here is to not interrupt it. Investing might be the most counterintuitive thing in personal finance. It's one of the only areas where more effort often leads to worse results. With almost everything else in life, more effort tends to produce better outcomes. With investing, the more you tinker, adjust, and try to optimize constantly, the worse you often end up doing. So the real shift is this: stop asking what you can do with your money this year, and start asking what you're building over the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's also worth naming the specific mistakes that derail people most often at this exact stage, because seeing them in advance makes them much easier to avoid. The first common mistake is trying to time the market with this money, waiting for the right moment to invest, watching for a dip, hesitating month after month while the money sits uninvested, earning essentially nothing. Historically, time in the market matters far more than timing the market. Waiting for a perfect entry point often costs more than any single bad investment ever could. The second common mistake is chasing exciting, high-risk investments with this milestone money simply because it feels significant enough to do something bold with. This is often exactly when people take on risk they don't fully understand. because the money finally feels like enough to matter. The third common mistake is telling too many people. Sharing this milestone with friends and family can unintentionally invite pressure. Requests to borrow money, suggestions for how it should be spent, or comparisons that create exactly the kind of social pressure we'll talk about in a moment. Keeping this progress relatively private, at least until the habits around it are solid, often protects it far better than celebrating it loudly. The fourth common mistake is treating this milestone as permission to stop paying attention. Some people build great habits to reach $10,000, then relax entirely once they arrive, assuming the hard part is behind them. In reality, this is exactly the stage where ongoing attention matters most, even if the actions required become smaller and less frequent. The fifth common mistake, and one of the quietest, is treating this milestone as a single event instead of the beginning of a repeatable system. Some people put enormous effort into reaching $10,000, then unconsciously stop applying the same discipline going forward, as if the goal was the number itself, rather than the habits that produced it. The people who go on to build real wealth tend to treat this milestone as proof that their system works, and simply keep running it, rather than reinventing their approach from scratch every time a new goal appears. There's also a psychological pattern worth naming clearly because it catches almost everyone off guard. The pressure to spend doesn't fade once you have savings, it gets stronger. And you'd think that having more money would mean feeling less pressure to spend it. It's actually the opposite. The temptation gets stronger, not weaker. Maybe friends start talking about a nicer neighborhood, and you start wondering if you should move too. You do, and your new neighbors have nicer cars, nicer vacations. Now that's the circle you're surrounded by, and the pull to keep up has never been stronger than the exact moment you finally have the means to give into it. This is incredibly common. There's nothing inherently wrong with spending money. The real question is always why you're spending it. Some purchases come from genuine purpose and enjoyment. Others come from wanting to keep up, wanting to fit in, wanting to be seen a certain way. So before any significant purchase, ask yourself, what's the opportunity cost of this? What am I giving up by spending here instead of somewhere else? If the honest answer is that it's genuinely worth it to you, and it reflects the life you actually want, spend it and enjoy it fully. If not, it's worth pausing and asking whether that same money would bring more real value somewhere else. Because once you've built that first real savings milestone, you now have the ability to make that choice on purpose, instead of defaulting into it just because everyone around you is doing the same thing. It also helps to see how this plays out differently depending on where you're starting from in life. If you're early in your career, the biggest advantage you have isn't the $10,000 itself, it's the number of decades ahead of you for that money to compound. Even modest, consistent contributions from here can grow into something substantial simply because time is doing most of the work. The temptation at this stage is impatience, wanting the results to show up faster than compounding actually allows. If you're in the middle of your career, this milestone often carries more emotional weight because it may have taken longer to reach, alongside competing responsibilities like family or a mortgage. The advantage here is usually a clearer sense of your own spending patterns. You likely already know where your money tends to leak, which makes the debt payoff and emergency fund steps faster to execute with precision. And if you're later in your career, reaching this milestone can feel bittersweet, aware that there are fewer decades left for compounding to work its magic. The advantage here isn't time, it's experience. You're less likely to fall for high-risk shortcuts and more likely to value the boring, steady approach that actually works. The order of operations doesn't change based on age. What changes is simply how much runway you have and how aggressively or conservatively you might structure the investing portion. Before wrapping up, let's run through a few quick questions people often ask right around this exact milestone. Should you pay off a low-interest debt, like a mortgage or a student loan, before investing? Generally, no. If the interest rate is low, historically the market has returned more on average than most low-interest debt costs. This is different from high-interest debt, which we already covered. The line is usually somewhere around 7 to 8% interest as a rough guide. Should you keep the entire emergency fund in cash, earning almost nothing? For the core amount, yes. The purpose of that money is safety and speed of access, not growth. Some people keep it in a high-yield savings account instead of a regular checking account, which earns modestly more while keeping the same easy access. Is it too late to start if you're not 25 anymore? No, the math of compounding still works powerfully at any age. It simply means being intentional about how much runway you have left, rather than assuming the opportunity is already past. What if $10,000 still feels small compared to what you actually need long-term? That's completely normal, and it's exactly why the order matters more than the amount. The habits and structure you put in place at this stage are what determine whether the next milestone comes faster or whether progress stalls out the same way it might have before. If this video changed how you think about your own first milestone, that's exactly the point. $10,000 isn't the finish line. It's the moment your money starts being able to work for you instead of the other way around if you let it. At the end of the day, what happens after that first $10,000 isn't about being smarter than everyone else. It's about following the right order, protecting what you've built from quiet lifestyle inflation, and giving compounding the time it actually needs to do the heavy lifting. The people who turn that first milestone into real wealth aren't necessarily the ones who started with more. They're the ones who understood that the real work was just beginning. Here at The Bigger Picture, we'll always explore the financial questions that truly matter. Not with fear, not with sensational headlines, but with honest conversations, clear explanations, and the bigger picture behind every story.